Thank you, Lynn, for that really kind introduction, and thank you to Teton County Search and Rescue for having me here to WYSAW. It's truly an honor to be here. I have to start with a disclaimer, and there's been some false advertising around my talk. It's not actually about avalanches, so hopefully no one wants to get up and leave. I do still think that it is applicable probably to most people in the room. There are a bunch of first responders, professional mountain guides, and to be honest, all of us experience stress in our everyday lives. So I hope there'll be some takeaways for you. And even if they're not, I hope you find it entertaining. So as Lynn mentioned, I have done a bunch of things over my career. I started out as an educator for Knowles, and I worked there for about 10 years. And I am so grateful for my time at Knowles. It really was the springboard for the rest of my career. I did all my first trainings with them, my avalanche trainings. I got my first experience with climbing and mountaineering through them. And in 2013, I got my EMT through them. That led to me working on an ambulance. And then in 2015, I got a job with Vail Ski Patrol, which, as a side note, TJ barely mentioned this, but he used to work with me as a Vail Ski Patroller. And I'm not sure what's going on at WYSAW and why you had to import so many Vail Ski Patrollers to talk to you, but you are welcome. And then, yes, as Lynn mentioned, I started working as a climbing ranger for Denali National Park in 2020, got my paramedic license in 2023, and am now the medical coordinator for our program. And if you know him, I am filling Dave Weber's shoes, which are quite large, but I have been having a lot of fun doing that. So last year, in the spring of 2024, I was involved in a pretty consequential rescue with the Park Service in the Alaska Range. And in processing that rescue, one of the things that I thought about, I kind of looked back over my career and just thought about how I've gotten better to showing up to these stressful scenes. And I do believe that it is a skill that all of us can learn. It took a lot of intention and self-reflection, but I think all the work I put in over the last decade or so allowed me to be an effective rescuer on that scene. And you can see in this picture, an effective rescuer in her pencil skirt and pumps at 14,000 feet on Denali, ready to leap into action. So this is what I'm going to talk about for the next 40 minutes or so. I want to kind of briefly explain why we react the way that we do in stressful situations, and sometimes in ways that we wish that we wouldn't. And then we're going to talk about the Mount Johnson case study. And finally, I just want to leave you with a couple points that you all might want to bring into your practice or think about as you head into the winter. And I included this picture. So this is Vail Ski Patrol responding to a very chaotic scene. It was at the bottom of the race course. A young ski racer caught an edge just as she was about to head through the finish line, got off course, and hit the timekeeper at the end of the course. So I'm not a ski racer. I don't know how fast she was going, probably like 60 miles an hour. Luckily, both patients survived, but they were critically injured, and the scene was incredibly chaotic. But I include this because Vail Ski Patrol, one of the things I really appreciated about it is that it emphasizes accountability for training, both on a personal level and on a team level. We do a ton of drills. And I think that is one of the key components of being able to show up to a stressful scene and perform really well, is that high level of training. And having been a part of a lot of high functioning teams, one of the things I've noticed in these scenes, if they've trained well together and they're effective, things just kind of hit a flow state. And things happen with very little communication. People just see what needs to happen next, and they grab that piece of equipment and make it happen. So that's one of the things I'm going to keep on hitting on in this presentation, is the importance of training. I'm going to start with a little why here on why I'm doing this talk. And yeah, so that's me on the right. Super cool in my patrol uniform, skiing powder. And if you've been a ski patroller, you know that second year is a really relieving place to be, because you made it through your first year, you didn't brick it hard enough that they invited you back, and the best part is they hired a whole new class of idiots that know even less than you do. So you're starting to gain some more confidence, and you're in a little better place. This is also kind of a dangerous place to be, and we've talked about this a lot in the Avalanche world. I included this graph that I found that made me laugh about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which was a study done in the late 90s. The basic gist of it, it's been interpreted a bunch of different ways, but the gist is someone gains a little bit of competence, and then their self-perception of their abilities tends to be outsized versus their judgment and experience, and you can get into trouble. And we've talked about this with relation to, who's getting caught in avalanches, right? It's not the people with no education, it's like the people with level ones. And I have heard people kind of extrapolate this might be one of the reasons why. But I included this graph because it made me laugh. You can see in the upper left-hand corner there, the top of that peak, the person labeled it the peak of Mount Stupid, which is where I am in this picture on the right, just to set the stage for this next story. So it's January 2017. I'm sitting in patrol headquarters. The only other person in there is my friend Cal, who's also a second-year patroller, and then our 2 dispatchers, and then a couple of managers in the back office doing whatever it is managers do, sending emails. No offense if you're a patrol manager out there, sorry. Dispatch gets the call that there is an unresponsive patient on a run called First Step. And First Step is right outside the door from PHQ. So I was like, this is it. Cal and I are gonna go save the shit out of this person because we're the only people available. But I was really excited. If you've worked on patrol, you know the way to really get involved with the action is to grab the most important piece of gear for an unresponsive patient, and that is the AED. So that is what I did. I ran into the med room, grabbed the AED, and then I went to check in with dispatch, who at this point is totally overwhelmed with phone calls about this patient. And I was like, First Step, right? I got the AED, and they're kind of like, yeah, just get out the door. So I get out the door, click into my skis, and start skating. So this is a map at the top of Vail Mountain. You can see patrol headquarters up there, and then lookers left, right down the ridge. There's a run called South Rim, right under the lift line, and then the run called First Step, which is where I was headed. So I'm skating as fast as I can down the catwalk, and as I'm headed to First Step, I noticed 2 Vail employees standing at the top of South Rim, waving their arms at me. And in my head, I was like, no, not now. Whatever customer service thing you need from me, I don't have time to do it. I am going to save this person on First Step, not on South Rim, whatever is happening there. You can probably see where the story is going. So I blow past them with the AED on my back. I get to First Step, which is a short run. You can see down the entire thing, and I look down it, and there's no one on the run. And I was like, shit. And things started to click for me. I was like, I think those 2 people were trying to tell me that the patient was actually on South Rim, which I'm now below. So I was like, I gotta fix this. I start traversing through the woods, 2-stepping as high as I can. I end up on South Rim, 15 feet below the patient, click out of my skis, boot pack up to the patient, and show up on scene a hot, sweaty mess, which is exactly what you want out of your rescuer. But thankfully, the person was not in cardiac arrest. They were just having a seizure, and they were coming around by the time I got on scene. More patrollers showed up, got the patient package, got him down, handed him off the ambulance. And I was like, recovered, no harm, no foul. That turned out okay. Fortunately for the patient, and unfortunately for me, one of the other patrollers on scene was one of our lead paramedics, Steve. And fairly, he was not impressed with my performance. And we rode the gondola up together, and he had some very pointed feedback for me, which is, don't take the main piece of life-saving equipment if you don't know where the hell you're going and you're not gonna pay attention. Despite all of my NOLS training on receiving feedback, I did not receive that piece of feedback very well. I was super defensive. I was like, dispatch told me to go there, so I talked to them, and I was just trying to get there as fast as possible. I was just doing what I was told. My response stemmed from the fact that I was really ashamed and embarrassed. I wanted to be a good patroller, I wanted to do a good job, and deep down, I knew that I had really messed this up. If this person had actually been in cardiac arrest and I had skied down the ridge and been too low to get the AED to them, which is the main thing they need right away, it could have resulted in a much worse situation. I managed to recover, everything turned out okay, but I also got lucky. So why did I respond that way? Why did I get tunnel vision and ignore any clues around me? So why do we all react the way that we do in times of stress? And sometimes in ways that we wish that we weren't. For instance, the aforementioned tunnel vision. I'm not going to take a deep dive into the physiological side of these things, especially because my talk is following a talk by 3 doctors who could probably give you a way better explanation. But I want to touch on it briefly. So all of our bodies have evolved these responses to stressful situations to help us survive. And obviously it's been successful. Humans have taken over the world. But when you're stressed, your nervous system is going to kick in and do a couple things that you don't have much control over. And as a side note, if you are constantly in this heightened state of arousal or stress, it can have some really bad long-term health effects. I'm not going to get into that. I think most people in the room have heard of Responder Alliance, and they've done a really good job on educating people and providing tools for managing that long-term chronic stress. So if you're in that place, I would recommend checking them out if you've not done so already. But back to short-term stress. So I bet everyone in the audience has heard the shorthand for how your autonomic, I cannot pronounce this word, your automatic nervous system functions. And these are functions that happen without us making any sort of decision about them. So you're either in recovery mode or you're responding to stress. So the shorthand for recovery mode is rest and digest. Your body's performing all these regulatory functions that you don't have to think about. And then when you're under stress, your body goes into this fight or flight mode and engages your sympathetic nervous system. A whole host of interesting things happens when you're in fight or flight mode, but some of them are you release adrenaline, which has a cascade effect upon a bunch of systems in your body. Your pupils dilate so you can take in more information. Your heart rate and your respiratory rate increases so that, sorry, I did not click back. Okay, there we go. Your heart rate and respiratory rate increase to provide more blood flow to your muscles and to your brain. And your liver releases glucose so that you have more energy available. And you've developed all these systems so that your body is kind of performing at its peak when you're responding to a threat. There are some pros to this, obviously. There's a reason why we evolved to do this. You can get heightened awareness, more focus, you have more energy resources available to respond. But the cons are kind of like what I was talking about. These systems, or these symptoms can be really overwhelming. You know, you start hyperventilating, your heart is like pounding in your ears. You can get tunnel vision, miss out on the bigger picture and important details. And as I mentioned, it is long-term, it's not healthy for you. So what can we do about it? This technique, I bet a bunch of people have heard of before, square breathing or box breathing, and I initially learned this to deal with patients who are hyperventilating, and it's really simple. You know, you inhale over the course of 4 seconds, hold that breath for 4 seconds, exhale over the course of 4 seconds, hold that for 4 seconds, inhale, and so on and so forth. And I found this to be a really effective tool for coaching patients and kind of bringing them down to a more calm state. One of the things I noticed about myself when I was heading to more acute wrecks, you know, like the unresponsive patients, is that as I was skiing there, I would notice my body, I would start hyperventilating. And it clicked for me at some point. I was like, oh, if this works on patients, it'll probably work on me. And I started to use this as I was like skiing to acute scenes, and it really helped. Like I would show up more calm on scene. You know, my sympathetic nervous system would be a little bit more under control. And it's a tool that I started using kind of early in my patrol career. There are a bunch of other techniques out there. There are other breathing exercises. I was talking to our medical director on Denali, Jen, about this. And she was like, the breathing exercises never really worked for me, but what does work for me is taking like a power pose, and you all might have heard of this too. They've done some studies on how power poses can like effectively calm you down before you head into like big meetings, stuff like that. So, you know, it's like basically opening your body, like chest open, hands on your hips, or another one, just like making yourself bigger, taking some deep breaths, just taking a few minutes to stay in those poses. Instead of like making your body smaller, crouching over, stuff like that. So that might be effective for some people too. But I guess my point with this is recognize how you respond under stress, like after you're in a stressful situation, take the time to relive it, think about what your body did, and then you will be able to anticipate it the next time you're in a situation like that, and maybe use some of these tools to kind of calm yourself down. And then again, I'm gonna keep hammering this, train on the basics, because when you are freaking out, you don't wanna be figuring out how to use your beacon for the first time that season. Practice your beacon searches, practice starting IVs, practice patient packaging, all those basic things. Because when you show up on a really chaotic scene, you just want those things to kind of flow out of you from muscle memory, and you don't wanna have to think about them, so you can maintain bigger situational awareness about what's going on. So that brings us to the Denali season 2024. Denali is a little different than what you all have going on down here with the Jenny Lake Rangers, and also obviously Teton County Search and Rescue, where you have a huge staff. We only have 12 mountaineering rangers, and during the bulk of the climbing season, when people are on the West Buttress for 2 months, the main route up Denali, we rely a ton on volunteers to come on our high camp patrols. And I know there are a bunch of volunteers in the room right now. Will you raise your hand if you've been a volunteer on Denali? A couple shy hands. Anyway, thank you. Our volunteers are hugely appreciated and kind of the backbone of our program. This works for us because we do a lot less business than you do here in the Tetons between Jenny Lake and Teton County Search and Rescues. And I know this from your Instagrams, in which sometimes it seems like you're doing 3 short hauls a day. And then also, for my friends who work here, like Travis, who will text me, you know, like once a week, be like, I got to short haul again. And I'm like, all right, cool. If my skis come off the ground today, it's gonna be because there was an accident, but good for you. So our climbing season is more condensed too. It is usually, the bulk of it is over 2.5 months. And we average somewhere in the mid-20s, like 25 major SARs a year. And basically what that means, a major SAR, is that our helicopter is involved. We have an A-STAR like you have here. It's really stripped down so that it can perform at altitude. Some other things that are different that might seem obvious. So this picture I took from kind of right outside the ranger station on the banks of the Susitna, and you can see the Alaska Range is not close. The Tetons are right outside y'all's door, but it is 45 miles to base camp for us. Another thing that you might have heard about Denali is that the weather sucks there, and that is true. So that will often shut down our rescues and is a really big part of our risk management matrix anytime we go into the field. And then finally, you might have also heard that Denali is at a higher altitude than here, which is a whole other risk management thing in itself and can make our operations a lot more dangerous. I think a good example of some of the types of the things we have to deal with, so also during 2024, we had a team of international climbers land at base camp, basically death march their way up the mountain, stopping at really random places, I guess, whenever they got tired. I think they ended up making it to the summit in like 4.5 days or something, not acclimatized. So they tag the summit, 20,310 feet. They start back down. They make it to 19.6, and at that point, at midnight, they decide that they need rescue, and they hit their SOS. We didn't have anyone on the higher mountain at that point, and we were not gonna start staging a rescue at midnight. So we encouraged them to move downhill, which they didn't really. And then, of course, the next morning, weather moved in. We were able to get a team up to 17. I was at 14,000 feet, and then we had our team in town. And we were dealing with this rescue for 5 days, and it was pretty agonizing. Like, our team was up 24/7, checking the weather, trying to see if we could fly. Our team at 17 was pinned down, probably not getting any sleep. My friend Liz King was in a tent at 17 for 5 days. You can ask her how being in a tent at 17 in a windstorm is for 5 days and how much sleep you get. It's not very much. And it just, even though these people, got themselves into this situation, like, it was so painful being like less than a mile away from them and not being able to do anything for them. Eventually the weather let up and we were able to get them. And the outcome was 1 fatality, 1 patient that was severely altitude sick and frostbitten, and then 1 guy who was admitted to the hospital and then walked out 2 hours later, which I have no idea how you spend a week at 19.6 and then just walk it off. Anyway, so just an idea of some of the protracted rescues that we have to deal with. Our training and our season starts mid-March, and we have kind of a month and a half long training block, and it's really the only time that all of us rangers are together, because after that we kind of disperse on our different high camp patrols. But we start out with rigging for rescue training and our medical refresher. Everyone on our team is at least an EMT. End of March, beginning of April, we try and get in the field and spend some time together doing a traverse, doing some Abbey training. And then first week of April, our helicopter comes on contract, which is my favorite time of year because I love flying. We have 2 very talented pilots. Every year they have to pass a short haul recurrency test, and once they do that, we have a really fun helicopter and short haul training. And this picture is from the last day of that training. The conditions lined up so that we were able to insert a ranger patient in an exposed spot, bring 2 rangers in to do patient packaging, assessment, and then short haul them back to staging. And I think, having a good training with your team where you get to do fun stuff like that is really elating. And I think we really ended our training block on a high note. And I think 10 days later, when I went on this rescue, that really helped me a lot. I felt prepared for it. I think most of the people in the room are probably familiar with what short haul is, being from Jackson, but just really briefly, in case you're not, short haul refers to the fact that we have a static line attached to the bottom of the ship, and we're not hoisting people in and out. Everything happens on the ground. You go to the site and then bring the patient back to the site. There are a bunch of different configurations we can do. We'll go recon the scene first, kind of decide what we're gonna do. We can have 1 ranger on the end of the line, a spotter on board. We can have 2 rangers inserted on scene. You can stay on the line, you can come off the line, and the ship can come back. And we have some different patient packaging abilities, which I'll show you in a second. One of the things that we do a lot at high altitude, so we have more performance, is we'll go recon the scene with the ranger and the pilot, go back to staging, usually at 14 camp, get the ship set up with the short haul line, and then we put a Coast Guard rescue basket on the end of the line and kick the ranger off so that the helicopter has more performance. And then the pilot brings the basket to the patient. And even if the patient is unattended, they can usually figure out what we're trying to tell them, which is to get in the basket so we can take you somewhere that sucks less than where you are right now. So that's a really nice tool that we have. Okay, so training is over. It is April 25th, and I know that I need to be prepared for the season because this is typically around the time we see our first search and rescue. So I've got my training done, my gear is all set, and the last thing I have to do is set my phone up, which is why I have the screenshot up here. So my family lives on the East Coast, and even though I have spent time in Alaska for the last 12 years, they do not seem to understand that Alaska is 4 hours behind them. So the family group text often starts blowing up with dog pictures at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. And I have to balance this with the fact that I have to leave my ringer on because I'm supposed to be on call. So the last thing I did was set up my favorites. So then you can put your phone on Do Not Disturb, and if it rings, only your it's one of your favorites calling you. So I got my work team up there, our dispatch, and my husband. You're welcome. So I set this up, I go to bed, and when my phone rings at 11 p.m., immediately I'm like, all right, this is it. We are having our first SAR right now. And I look at it, and it's my supervisor, Joey, and I think all I managed to croak out was, "What's wrong?" And he quickly stated the situation. I was like, okay, the first one is not gonna be a layup. There was a reporting party in the Ruth Gorge on Mount Johnson who said that they watched 2 climbers fall past them a significant distance and end up on a snow slope below them. And they did not have any reports of how those people were doing, but they knew it was significant enough that we were gonna need to get involved. So this is kind of a map of the area. Sorry, 2 things at once. This is a map of the area that we're dealing with. So you can see the Talkeetna Ranger Station, and then that line is to Mount Johnson, and is about 45 miles away at the entrance to the Ruth Gorge there on the west side. And then I also put the Denali Summit up there just for reference, and that huge glacier that's running north to south to the west of the Denali Summit, that's the Kahildna, which is where the West Buttress route goes up, where most people end up when they go to climb Denali. At this point in the season, all of our resources are in town, so we have no personnel on the mountain, and later in the season we also leave a bunch of fuel at base camp, and that is not in place yet. So it just kind of makes our margins a little bit thinner. Yeah, okay. So this is a picture of the route. It's a 4,000-foot mixed route. It doesn't get climbed a ton, so it was really interesting that there were 2 parties on it at the same time. And another very lucky fact about this is the fact that the second party was not hit by the first party falling. I've got some better pictures of it, but there's really no protection on this route from overhead hazard. So we are super lucky, A, that second party was able to report that anything had happened, because otherwise we wouldn't have known. And then also that they were not hit themselves, because it would have made for a much worse situation. So this is a picture of the scene that we took 2 days later when the weather was better. But up on the summit ridge, that A, we figured out that's where the original party fell from. B is where the second team was standing at a belay stance, and then C is where the fallen party came to rest on a less steep snow slope. I think it was still like 38, 40 degrees, but luckily the snow was it was good. It's the kind of snow that you want to go boot packing in, easy to work with, easy to stand on, which really helped when I went in to package this patient. The second team turned out to be a team of 2 professional mountain guides. They both had their woofers, which was awesome, but they had not been involved in any sort of professional rescue before, so they had not seen anything like this before. And I think with the background and the training they had, they did an exceptional job. They almost certainly kept the survivor alive through the night. They built a snow cave to protect themselves from overhead hazard, and they built a little platform, but they were afraid to move the surviving patient because they were worried about injuring her C-spine further. And I think also whenever they tried to move her, it elicited a really bad pain response, which is a stressful thing to see if you haven't seen it before. So I think for that reason, they decided to leave her on the snow, but they did a good job monitoring her through the night and stuffing hot water bottles in her jacket to kind of keep her from getting too hypothermic. So we're super lucky that they were there. Anyway, meanwhile, back in Talkeetna, I get off the phone with Joey. He's like, "You get some sleep. You can come into the office later." And I'm like, "Okay, Joey, yeah, I'm gonna get a ton of sleep now." I'm like, my heart is pounding, and I'm thinking about what we're about to go do. But yeah, I'll go back to sleep, no problem. I don't think I got any sleep. Anyway, we ended up in the office at 3:30. It was me, Supervisor Joey, and then our other supervisor, Tucker, just all sitting around the table looking at each other in an exhausted manner, trying to figure out what we're gonna do for this rescue. At this time of year, darkness is still an issue for us. Like towards the solstice, we only get like 4 hours of dusk, which gives us more flexibility. But sunrise wasn't till 6 a.m. on this day. So we're looking at weather products, and then we also use a lot of imagery tools. So in this picture, you can see the FAA webcams. We're lucky enough to have one pointed like directly at the range, which gives us a really good visual. I took this screenshot. This might be from 3 in the morning. Obviously can't see anything. But it got better as it got lighter. And then we also look at a lot of NASA satellite imagery to see if there are any holes that we can kind of sneak down into and get into the range. On our end, to be honest, it looked closed. But luckily, because we had those 2 guides on the ground, they were able to give us a good weather report that seemed favorable enough that with a critical patient, we should go try and launch. So that's what we did. Right before we launched, the last report we got was that the patient was hanging on, responsive to pain, they didn't want to move her, respiratory rate 28, and they said they couldn't find a pulse, which I assume meant they couldn't find a radial pulse because she was really cold. And this is us flying to the scene. I don't know why I'm grinning like an idiot in this picture, because I was pretty nervous and tired. I think Tucker's expression, the 1,000-yard stare out the window, is a lot more indicative of the state that we were in, but there we are on our way. So the first thing we did was went and did a scene assessment. And this picture obviously is from a clear day, but we got there and the ceiling was only about 500 feet above the scene. So we had brought in a 200-foot short haul, we had brought in a 200-foot short haul line, and if you do the math on that, that puts the ceiling 300 feet above the helicopter, which is a thinner margin than I'd like to be working with, but we decided it seems stable enough that we should give it a shot. Our other risk management concerns were overhead hazard. Again, this route, there's really no protection from overhead hazard, things falling down the route. And then also you'll notice that X is like pretty close to the granite wall there. So another big concern was stuff falling off of that and possibly falling into the rotor disc, which would be catastrophic. So we decided the best setup for this was to leave one of us on board as a spotter, just to help our pilot, John, with some situational awareness and kind of looking around. And then having more medical experience than Tucker as a paramedic, it was decided I would go in on the end of the line and retrieve the patient. So I was talking kind of about patient packaging, and that configuration on the right is really, the best patient packaging. It's like a full body vacuum splint in a Bowman bag, really nice and stable, safe way to fly with the patient. As you can imagine, also labor intensive and more time consuming. And we decided that we really did not want to spend that long on scene. So I was like, we're going with the option on the right, which we call a screamer suit. And it is just a triangle of fabric with 2 armholes, as you can see. It does do a pretty good job of like keeping the patient's C-spine in line. And I was like, I'll bring a seat collar too, put that on. We were gonna package and then get the hell out of here. This is a topo of the route, and you can see that cleft, like that's where the climbing line is. You're in the bowling alley. Like there is no protection from overhead hazard. So you can see the top there, and then you can see where the patient came to rest, like on that 38, 40-degree slope. And then we chose staging down on the glacier where there was a ski track and a little more definition to help our pilot land. So we decided on the plan. We go down to the glacier and just start getting things ready. And like I've mentioned, Tucker and I trained together. Both of us spent a bunch of time training, and he's worked on Denali way longer than I have. And we just entered into that flow state, like very little communication, just making things happen, taking the baskets off the helicopter, getting the gear ready, laying the short haul line out, doing safety checks, doing comm checks, making sure I had what I needed. And pretty soon, I don't know how long that took us, but pretty soon it was time to go. So Tucker gave me a big hug, got on the helicopter, gave me a thumbs up, shut the door, and I was like, oh shit, okay, I am alone now, and this is on me. And it was really kind of like a surreal experience. realizing that's what was happening. The helicopter takes off, and I am dangling a couple hundred feet above the Ruth Glacier, and my body starts to react the way that it normally does in these situations. So I start hyperventilating a little bit, but I, have trained and anticipated that, so I used some breathing exercises to bring myself down. And the next thing I noticed is that, I'm sitting in my harness underneath the ship, and I was like, oh, my hip flexors are so tight and my shoulders are so tense. And I was like, all I'm doing right now is wasting energy. So I took a really conscious effort to just kind of like relax into my harness so that I would show up more prepared on scene. And then I had the realization that I was like pretty helpless in that moment. Like, if I hadn't done everything to prepare for this moment up until now, then there wasn't anything that was gonna happen in the next 2 minutes that was gonna prepare me for the scene. So I was like, I guess I'll just look around. And if y'all have been in the Ruth Gorge, it is a really incredible place. It is so beautiful there. It's just all these 1,000-foot granite walls diving into the glacier. And I just tried to focus on that on the flight over, because I really couldn't do anything else. So I got on scene. Our helicopter pilot, John, incredibly talented. He put me directly on the scene. And I took a few minutes to assess what I needed to do. And I radioed up. I was like, okay, I think I need 10 minutes. And this was the most dire scene I've ever been on. It was pretty terrible. The two patients that fell, as they fell, their rope kind of cocooned around them, and they were like totally tangled together. The deceased patient was laying down on the snow, and the survivor was laying on top of her. And I do think that that helped insulate her from the snow and helped her from getting more hypothermic. But, their climbing ropes are totally tangled. Harness is like taut on something. Her backpack was taut on something. So I just got my trauma shears out and just started cutting things. Cutting, climbing rope, backpack. I had to cut her harness off. Again, the snow was good where I felt like I had a good stance where I could kind of hold her there, but I did not like the fact that she was not attached to the slope for a little bit. But I'm not sure, I've thought about that a lot, I'm not sure what else I would have done. And the platform that those two had made was super helpful. Put the sea collar on her, did a super brief assessment, but I was like, she survived for 10 hours without me here. She does not need my medical intervention right now. She just needs to get packaged and leave. So that was my main focus. Meanwhile, this is the view that Tucker has inside the ship. That's John looking out the bubble, watching me down on the slope. And it's hard to convey from this picture like how close we were to that granite wall. The next day I spotted for Tucker when he retrieved the deceased patient, and all I could look at was that granite wall through the front windshield of the helicopter, and I was like, I do not like this. And the other thing that was happening is the ceiling was dropping, which I'm really glad that I didn't know. But got the patient packaged, gave the sign it was time to leave, and luckily I'd done a good job, and Kevin the guide on scene did not have to cut us free from anything that I missed. So we returned to the glacier and start packaging the patient. And again, we want to move fast. And I realize that I am moving too fast, and I still have my crampons on. And I was like, if I step on the patient or the back mat with my crampons, we're going to have a problem. And I was like, okay, just slow down again. So I did that, did an assessment on the patient. She clearly had a bad head injury, but otherwise she was stable. And I was like, this person just needs to get to definitive care. We don't need to do any interventions here on the glacier. And I included these two pictures just to kind of show like how we fit the patient in the helicopter. Our helicopter is left-hand drive, so to fit a patient in, we put up the right bench seat, and then their feet go next to the pilot, and they kind of take up that whole right side. And then with two rangers in there, there's like no room to operate. Tucker was sitting on the left behind the pilot, and I was like crammed in the door, like crouched over the patient, just tethered in with my harness. But flying back into town over that 40-minute flight with oxygen and cranking the heat in the helicopter, the patient recovered to 801. She could tell us her name, and she also said thank you when we handed her off to LifeMed, which I was like, this is amazing. It was a totally elating experience to have happen. So wrapping things up, next day we returned to collect the deceased patient. Looking at the tracks, we determined that, the fall height was at least 1,500 feet. So it was just amazing that this woman had survived that. Her list of injuries was extensive. So she had a TBI with some brain bleeds, compression fracture of 2 vertebrae. Her right knee was almost completely dislocated, just her MCL was holding on. Bilateral broken thumbs, fractured sternum, which is apparently a terrible recovery. Fractured left ankle, sprained right ankle, and then some minor frostbite on her face and her fingers. Long list of things, but all in all, pretty good outcome. So every time I have an incident like this, it always takes me a little time to come down from it. Like right after it, I'm always really jacked up, and then I keep reliving it in the days afterwards. One of the things that really helps me to kind of process these things is to talk to someone who wasn't there, often a friend, like not affiliated with my team. I always feel really guilty doing this because a lot of my friends didn't sign up to see the fucked up shit that I see out there. So when I dump it on them, I'm like, I'm sorry, do you mind if I do this? And then I feel guilty that they're carrying part of the burden of my trauma. But I have good friends out there who have been super helpful in that regard. So I'm at my house the next day, and my dad calls me, and I try to protect my parents from what I do. They have some dismay about how dangerous my job is, so I try not tell them all of the things that happen. For instance, I just wrote the ski cutting article for TAR, and now they think I'm gonna die ski cutting. So I try and keep it kind of a little more mellow. But my dad called me at the right moment when I needed to speak to someone, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna tell him the story. And he was a really good listener. I didn't spare him any details. He asked me clarifying questions. And at the end, he was silent for a second, and I was like, I'm in trouble. My dad's gonna get mad at me. But all he said was, I'm really proud of you. And that cracked me just a little bit, enough to be vulnerable and verbalize something to him that I hadn't really even been able to admit to myself yet. And I said, Dad, I was really fucking scared. And his response was just so perfect and obvious. He said, yeah, of course you were scared. What you were doing was really dangerous. And if you're ever in a situation like that and you're not scared, you need to think about why. And I was like, all right, complacency. I teach students about that all the time. Nailed it. Thanks, Dad. So that kind of brings me to the learnings that I would like you to take away from these experiences that I've had. I'm gonna say it one last time, you need to train. Train like your life depends on it, like your coworkers' lives depends on it, like your ski partners' lives depend on it, and like your patient lives depend on it. You don't want the first time you're getting your beacon out for the season is when your best friend is buried in the snow. You need to have all those basics dialed so that when you are stressed out and in stressful situations like this, you can just go and operate automatically and get things done. The second one is kind of what I've been saying. Next time you're in a stressful situation, afterwards take time to reflect on that. Reflect on how you reacted to it, what your body did, and the next time you'll be able to anticipate those reactions and try out some of those techniques that I talked about for calming yourself down. And the last thing is, listen to what my dad said. If you are scared, there's probably a reason why. Take a step back, examine that, and decide whether or not you need to change course, speak up to your group. Don't become complacent. We all know complacency kills experts every year, and it will continue to do so. And let's do the best we can to not become part of those statistics. So these are the things I'm gonna take into this winter, and hopefully there's something useful in there for you as well. And that's all I got. Lynn.
Can we all agree that, Chrissie, we're really proud of you?
Thank you, that means a lot. I do want to say a lot of people who have taught me over the years are in this room right now, including Lynn, so thank you, it's because of you all.
Yeah. I couldn't do what she just did. You know, I can keep my shit together when other things hit the fan, but hanging from a helicopter? Goddamn, girl.
It's really fun. I don't
It's
know.
really fun. Hell of a story. Do you want to ask questions or do you want to go get beer?
I will be around for the next day and a half, so you can ask me questions over beer.
So, yeah, all right, well.